Frederic Vasseur has thrown Lewis Hamilton out after he said he felt useless at Ferrari. Want to know the main reasons? Want to understand why no one is talking about it yet? Then this video is for you. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton's body language after the Australian Grand Prix wasn't just frustration, it was the collapse of belief. There were no handshakes, no polite nods, no post-race composure. As he stepped out of his SF-25 and yanked off his gloves with a grimace, the message was clear: something inside him had snapped. He didn't look like a driver disappointed by a poor race. He looked like a warrior abandoned by his army. And then, with the cameras rolling and the world watching, he dropped a quote that will be etched into the season's narrative forever. "It's like I'm driving someone else's dream, not mine." The words were heavy, not just because of what they implied, but because of who said them. A 7-time world champion, a Ferrari driver, a man brought in to end the longest drought in Formula One. Instead, he's suffocating in it. What followed behind the scenes made the on-camera outburst feel tame. According to senior insiders within the Scuderia, what took place in the minutes after the race inside the Ferrari operations room was nothing short of an earthquake. Hamilton didn't wait for the cool-down. He didn't speak through a press officer. He walked straight into the post-race technical meeting and unloaded on the leadership with a cold fury that no one saw coming. "You've turned the world's most iconic racing team into a one-man orchestra," he allegedly said, slamming his data sheet onto the table. "And I wasn't given an instrument." Team principal Frederic Vasseur tried to intervene, but Hamilton wasn't finished. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. He pointed directly to the misalignment between the wind tunnel simulations and the live telemetry. He questioned the absence of promised upgrades that had been scheduled since round one. He called out the pit wall's lack of adaptability. And most significantly, he implied that his side of the garage was being treated like a B team within its own team. Charles gets what he needs. I get explanations. You call that equality? A stunned silence followed. Even Leclerc, seated nearby, reportedly didn't respond, his expression blank, his posture frozen. He had just stood on the podium. Hamilton had finished outside the top 6 for the 3rd race in a row. But the numbers no longer mattered, the culture did. Because Hamilton's attack wasn't just about results. It was about identity. He came to Ferrari not to be a passenger, but a pillar. Not to be a backup plan, but the blueprint. And now, just 3 races into the season, the dream was unraveling. Over the next 72 hours, the paddock exploded with whispers. Hamilton's inner circle, known for being bulletproof, began holding private meetings in Melbourne with people far outside the Ferrari bubble. One confirmed meeting occurred at a discreet high-rise suite with Audi's senior racing strategists. Another, far more secretive, was with a McLaren senior advisor. There's even speculation that a high-ranking Mercedes engineer joined a video call from Brackley just one day after the Grand Prix. What was being discussed? Exit strategies, contract clauses, development influence, power unit future control. Ferrari, meanwhile, went into lockdown mode. Media access was reduced. The drivers gave carefully crafted interviews. Vasseur insisted everything was normal. But no one bought it, not after what came next. A second leak. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. This time, it was an internal email thread between Ferrari's aero department leads, detailing concerns about structural rear-end instability under high-load transitions, especially on circuits with elevation changes. The memo, dated 2 weeks before the Australian GP, specifically warned that the setup would expose serious limitations for a driver with a smooth, progressive throttle profile. That's Hamilton's exact driving style. And yet, no modifications were made. No alerts were sent. No backup plan was prepared. Someone had ignored it. Or worse, dismissed it. Now, the media had its smoking gun. Analysts piled on. Podcasts exploded. Fans took sides. Was Ferrari purposefully sidelining Hamilton to protect Leclerc's momentum? Or was the team simply overwhelmed and disorganized, buckling under the pressure of managing 2 elite talents? Either way, the damage was done. And inside Maranello, The cracks widened. Technicians began to split into two factions, those aligned with Hamilton's vision for structural reform and those loyal to the old system built around Leclerc. Some began skipping internal meetings. Others stopped sharing data across garages. The synergy that makes a top-tier F1 operation run like clockwork? Gone. Even Leclerc began to feel the weight. His public statements changed. Gone was the confident, cheerful Monegasque. In came a more reserved, hesitant figure. When asked if Ferrari could handle internal pressure, his answer was measured, "It depends what kind of pressure you're talking about." At Imola, things reached a boiling point. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Hamilton arrived wearing a black hat with no Ferrari branding. During practice, he ran a separate simulator program from the team's standard prep. During qualifying, he didn't speak once on the radio until the final lap. After finishing ninth, he walked back to the garage alone, refusing the traditional handshake with his race engineer. And then, after the race, he vanished. Not a single media appearance. No team photo. No press obligations. Ferrari's official explanation? Personal commitments. But everyone knew the relationship was broken. Now, all eyes are on Barcelona, the turning point. If Ferrari doesn't deliver on the long-promised chassis update, if Hamilton doesn't see real change in setup customization, if he continues to feel like an afterthought in a machine he was supposed to lead, the season may not end with a title fight, it may end with a divorce. And here's the thing Ferrari fans are beginning to fear most. Hamilton isn't bluffing. He has nothing left to prove. He's a global icon, a statistical titan, and the most influential name in the sport. If he walks away from Ferrari, it won't be in defeat. It'll be with the clarity that sometimes you don't save a legacy by enduring pain, you protect it by letting go. Because Lewis Hamilton didn't join Ferrari for nostalgia. He joined to write history. And now, if the Scuderia doesn't give him the pen, he'll find another publisher. The Ferrari garage had become a pressure cooker of boiling tension, and the lid had just been blown clean off. Everyone inside the motorhome felt it. Engineers exchanged nervous glances. Marketing staff whispered behind laptops. Mechanics pretended to check tools they'd already packed up. No one dared say a word. The paddock was on fire, and the match that had lit the blaze was Lewis Hamilton. Still wearing his race suit, helmet off but gloves still on, Lewis sat motionless in the corner of the lounge. The screens in the background replayed his now infamous post-race interview, his voice, calm but cutting, condemning Ferrari's strategic paralysis, its failure to evolve, its inability to fight for anything meaningful. It was brutal, unscripted, and utterly damning. He didn't regret a single word. And then, the air shifted. The door burst open like a cannon blast. Frederic Vasseur didn't walk in. He stormed, eyes wild, mouth clenched, fists shaking at his sides like a man teetering on the edge of a breakdown. "You've lost your damn mind," he snapped, slamming the door shut behind him so hard the entire hospitality unit seemed to jolt. "You've just torched every ounce of trust in this team in under 2 minutes." Hamilton turned his head slowly, unfazed, calm as still water in a storm. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence itself was confrontational. "You stood in front of the world and dissected us," Vasseur seethed, taking heavy steps forward. "You accused the strategy team of incompetence, you undermined the engineers, and you questioned my leadership. Do you have any idea what that's done to morale?" Lewis rose to his feet with deliberate slowness, his presence towering, his voice a low burn. "I'm not here to be anyone's mascot," he said. "I was hired to bring Ferrari back to the top. But I won't be complicit in mediocrity just to keep the optics clean." Vasseur laughed. Harsh, sharp, bitter. "Mediocrity? You've barely out-qualified midfielders this season. You're behind Charles in the standings. And now you're playing the martyr." "I'm playing realist," Lewis snapped, stepping forward. "I came here expecting a project. I didn't expect denial. I didn't expect a team more worried about image than performance. We're not just behind, we're delusional about where we stand." Vasseur's nostrils flared. "You don't get to walk into this team, drag its name through the mud, and pretend you're the solution. You're supposed to be the catalyst. You're supposed to lead. But instead, You're acting like a mercenary with a microphone. A flicker of something dangerous crossed Hamilton's face. Anger, restrained. Controlled. Weaponized. I've led teams to dominance. I've rebuilt from nothing. You think this is about ego? This is about principle. Ferrari isn't failing because of me. It's failing because no one inside this building has the guts to admit we're broken. You're not the savior you think you are, Vasseur spat. You're a headline machine. A liability. You've demoralized the pit wall, disrespected the factory, and fractured the very core of this operation. And you're a politician in a garage suit, Lewis fired back. You care more about press conferences than progress. More about boardroom appeasement than track performance. The room crackled with electricity. The walls might as well have been closing in. Then, Vasseur leaned in, voice like a blade sliding across ice. You're one outburst away from being benched. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've won. This is Ferrari. And nobody is bigger than the Scuderia. Hamilton smiled, not with joy, but with a slow, cold grin of a man who had just confirmed what he already suspected. No, he said softly, but Ferrari can still lose everything trying to pretend it is. There was a pause, sharp and silent, a canyon of tension between them. Then Vasseur spoke, quieter now, more venomous. Do you know who called me today? Board members. Investors. Legacy sponsors. You've caused waves, Lewis. Big ones. And guess what? There are other drivers who would kill to wear this red suit and actually protect the team that gives them a seat. Lewis's eyes narrowed, deadly. And how many of them can survive the pressure that comes with fixing this team instead of pretending it's still iconic? You think Charles will carry you to a title? He's struggling just like me. Only difference is, I'm not pretending. The door opened suddenly. A PR coordinator leaned in, pale as a ghost. The media's asking if Lewis is being suspended, she said, visibly shaking. Sky Sports is already running with it. Vasseur stared at her, then at Hamilton, the war in his eyes visible. Hamilton turned to her calmly. Tell them I'm still driving. Unless Fred wants to give the world another headline. She disappeared like a ghost. Lewis grabbed his towel, slung it over his shoulder, and moved past Vasseur without another word. But as he walked out, he dropped one final line, under his breath, barely audible. Watch the telemetry. The problem's not me. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Vasseur alone in the storm he could no longer control. The walls of Maranello weren't just cracking, they were collapsing. And Lewis Hamilton had just walked out of the fire, without a single burn. The insult wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was spoken so quietly, so deliberately, that it carried more venom than a scream ever could. Disconnected. That's the word Vasseur used. And it hit Lewis Hamilton like a sniper shot straight to the soul. He didn't respond immediately. He didn't have to. His body did the talking. The way he stiffened. The way his jaw flexed. The way his eyes, once tired, now burned with a different light. The air inside the Ferrari briefing room, usually charged with quiet respect, grew thick with electricity. Nobody breathed. No one moved. Not the engineers. Not the strategists. Even the hum of a laptop fan sounded like thunder in the silence. Lewis turned toward the team boss slowly. Purposefully. Not with rage. Not with panic. With precision. Like a man who had been insulted by someone who had no idea what kind of beast they had just awakened. You think I'm disconnected? He asked, voice low, eyes locked on Vasseur like crosshairs. Vasseur didn't flinch. He leaned back, arms folded, lips pressed into a cold line. I think you've detached from the grind. You look like a man going through motions, waiting for the car to be perfect before you turn up the heat. But in this paddock, perfection never comes. You have to bend the chaos to your will. The accusation wasn't just professional, it was personal. And Lewis felt it like a dagger sliding between ribs. He stepped forward, quiet but loaded with energy, as if the very floor beneath him might crack with each footfall. I've spent 2 decades bending chaos to my will, he said, voice rising a notch, no longer calm, no longer filtered. I've driven through blizzards, through tire failures, through political crossfires, through teams falling apart behind closed doors. And I still won. You think I need comfort to fight? He was closer now, inches away, his stare sharp enough to cut glass. I've turned disasters into dynasties. I've outlasted icons. I've buried doubt under silverware. And now, you hand me this car, this stubborn, unstable, temperamental beast, and expect miracles by Sunday afternoon. He glanced toward the telemetry screens on the wall. You see numbers. I feel betrayal. I tell you the car is snapping mid-corner. You call it driver error. I tell you there's no front-end bite. You say push harder. You don't want honesty. You want compliance. The room was silent. Engineers exchanged glances. Some looked at their shoes. Others at the screens, pretending not to listen. But every word pierced the walls. Vasseur exhaled, long and slow. This isn't about honesty. It's about intensity. I don't care what you've done at Mercedes. You're wearing red now. You carry Enzo's legacy. That demands war, not excuses. The mention of Mercedes was like acid. Lewis blinked once. Slowly. Then he smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a man remembering every moment he'd been underestimated, and every time he'd proved them wrong. You think I'm not at war, he said, voice now coated with venom. I've been battling since the moment I arrived here. Battling the balance. Battling the politics. Battling a culture that resents outsiders unless they bleed scarlet. He turned and pointed to the scarlet prancing horse stitched on his chest. You put this on me and expected instant magic. But I'm not your miracle. I'm your mirror. I reflect the cracks you've been hiding for years. The outdated systems. The strategy blunders. The obsession with aesthetics over aggression. He paused, eyes narrowing. And let me tell you something, Fred. I didn't come here to be your savior. I came here to build something no one thought possible. To take the weight of this legend, carry it through the fire, and bring it back to glory. Not with nostalgia. With brutality. Vasseur's composure finally cracked. Just slightly. A twitch at the corner of his eye. A tightening of the jaw. And what happens, he asked, voice calm but thin, if you can't do it? What happens if the myth of Lewis Hamilton finally falls apart in red? Lewis didn't hesitate. Then I burn with it, he said. But I will never fade. He turned and walked out without another word, the door swinging shut behind him like the final note of a symphony composed in rage. Down the hallway, Charles Leclerc, still in his race suit, watching from the shadows, leaned against the wall, face unreadable. He had heard everything. Later that night, the Italian press leaked whispers of a screaming match in the Ferrari war room. Speculations ran wild. Headlines exploded. Is Hamilton already regretting the red move? Ferrari in crisis mode. Leclerc and Hamilton divided? But inside the factory, something more dangerous was brewing. Not division. Not collapse. But awakening. Hamilton wasn't soft. He was sharpening. And when legends sharpen, they don't whisper. They roar. Lewis Hamilton stood still, every muscle in his body wound tight like a spring under unbearable tension. The room, dimly lit and sterile, suddenly felt like a battlefield. It wasn't just an office, it was an execution chamber. And Frederick Vasseur had just pulled the trigger with the cool detachment of a man who'd rehearsed this moment far too many times. His voice had landed like a lead weight, impossible to ignore. No, Lewis. You don't loathe defeat the way champions do. If you did, we'd see it in your actions, not in press releases, not in designer sunglasses, not in social media campaigns. Charles is leading from the front. You, meanwhile, are disappearing in the background. Every syllable was venom-coated in diplomacy. Hamilton's lips parted, but no words emerged. His eyes, usually so controlled, flickered with disbelief, and something else, betrayal. Not the kind that erupts into shouting. The kind that sinks into your spine like frostbite and stays there forever. Vasseur didn't blink. Didn't soften. Didn't stop. We needed a commander, a driver to resurrect this team from decades of near misses and mediocrity. Instead, we got a celebrity. A figurehead. A name whose gravity no longer pulls this team upward, but drags it into chaos. Ferrari isn't your redemption story, Lewis. And it's no longer your stage. The air was thick, almost suffocating. Hamilton inhaled slowly, searching for composure, for control, but it was slipping, second by second. He'd survived championship losses, team betrayals, title deciders in the final lap of final races. But this was different. This was being told, point blank, that he was no longer needed. Then, Vasseur delivered the final cut. This is irreversible. The board is unanimous. You'll be contacted by our legal counsel within the week. Your exit is in motion. To be perfectly clear, Lewis, you no longer fit what Ferrari represents. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Hamilton's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the surge of something ancient and primal. Anger, resentment, pride, and pain. Because for all the titles, for all the glory, all the records and broken barriers, he had finally found the one thing he couldn't outrun: rejection from the team he once believed would immortalize him. He looked at Vasseur, really looked. Not just at the man, but at what he represented. Order, structure, cold precision, and above all else, loyalty to Charles Leclerc. The shift had been happening for months. Strategy briefings that ended without his input. Team meetings where Charles was praised and he was evaluated. PR campaigns that used his name but never his voice. Hamilton had become a monument, respected, admired, but no longer heard. And now, it was official. He was out. Outside that room, the paddock had no idea what was unfolding. But inside, a transformation had already begun. Hamilton wasn't broken, he was sharpening. "I gave you everything," he said, voice low, almost guttural. "No," Vasseur replied coolly. "You gave us what you had left. And it wasn't enough." Hamilton clenched his jaw. The insult didn't just sting, it ignited something. A fire long buried beneath the surface of brand deals and scripted interviews. The fire that had built a legend. The fire that once took on the entire F1 establishment and won. "You're going to regret this," he said, not as a threat, but as a prophecy. Vasseur offered a faint, dismissive smile. "Maybe. Or maybe this is exactly what Ferrari needs to finally breathe again." And that was it. The moment the page turned. Ferrari had chosen its direction, and it didn't include Lewis Hamilton. Within hours, leaks began to surface. Sky Italia hinted at irreconcilable differences between Hamilton and the executive board. Motorsport.com ran with an unnamed source claiming Hamilton's influence has been steadily declining. ESPN's F1 desk posted a cryptic article, "The Final Curtain at Maranello?" Meanwhile, Leclerc remained silent. But insiders knew better. He'd been consolidating power for months. Quiet talks with Binotto loyalists. Late-night simulator sessions with the tech teams. Closed-door meetings with Ferrari's commercial division. The golden boy had grown teeth. And now, with Hamilton pushed to the edge, Charles was not just the face of Ferrari, he was its architect. But across the paddock, whispers were growing louder. Mercedes had been circling. Wolff had never truly closed the door. Rumors of a 2026 legacy return were gaining traction. Audi, desperate for star power ahead of their debut, was allegedly preparing a $150 million two-year megadeal. Even Red Bull insiders reported ongoing conversations with a mysterious figure not named Ricciardo. Hamilton, meanwhile, vanished from the media. No interviews, no statements, no tweets, just silence. But it wasn't retreat. It was reloading. Behind the scenes, his team was working overtime, analyzing offers, reading between the lines, monitoring boardroom politics. And Lewis, he wasn't thinking about retirement anymore. He was thinking about demolition. If Ferrari wanted to erase him from their story, then he'd make sure that story never ended the way they planned. He would take their secrets, their strategy, their vulnerabilities, and use them. Because you don't cut a lion and expect him to heal quietly. You expect him to hunt. And so, a new chapter loomed. Not of redemption, but of reckoning. The king hadn't fallen. He had simply changed his kingdom. And Formula One? It was about to feel the fury of a legend with nothing left to prove, but everything left to destroy. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just turned, walked away, and vanished down the corridor with an eerie calm that stung more than fury ever could. No explosion. No confrontation. Just brutal detachment. That's what hurt the most. Lewis remained still, his boots glued to the floor as if the very ground had betrayed him. His fingers twitched at his sides. His throat tightened. He'd heard sharp words before: criticism, pressure, politics. But this wasn't strategy or feedback. This was rejection disguised as professionalism. A dismissal with a polite face. The silence afterward was deafening. Not even the distant hum of tire guns or media chatter remained. The paddock had emptied. The floodlights were dimming. The night had swallowed everything, leaving only shadows and the sting of those words ricocheting through his chest. He wandered the halls like a ghost. Each step was heavier than the last. The debrief was a blur. The data was meaningless. He nodded at engineers he didn't hear, signed off simulations he didn't care about. None of it mattered anymore. The numbers didn't lie, and they weren't on his side. Hours later, when the motorhome was dark except for a few emergency lights, Lewis found solitude in a back corner booth. Hoodie up. Headphones on. Eyes down. His body language screamed, "Leave me alone," but his mind was begging for someone, anyone, to break through the fog. He stared at the floor like it held the answers he couldn't find. The music blared in his ears, distorted, chaotic, matching the storm inside his head, but not even that could drown out the narrative looping on repeat. You're too old. You're too slow. You're not him anymore. Then, unexpectedly, a quiet presence broke through the silence. A figure approached with careful steps, not intrusive but intentional. Charles. The younger driver stood for a moment, uncertain whether to speak. Then, choosing empathy over protocol, he sat down across from Lewis, leaning on the table with the kind of concern that didn't need words. "I heard about earlier," Charles said softly, watching him closely. Lewis didn't look up, didn't flinch, just kept his gaze locked on the table. "Forget it," he muttered. "Not worth talking about." But Charles wasn't buying it. "It is," he insisted, tone low but firm. "You were treated unfairly. That wasn't leadership. That was scapegoating." Lewis slowly pulled his headphones off, the music still faintly audible from the cushions. "I'm not blind, Charles. I know I'm underperforming. I've been around long enough to see the writing on the wall. The car's moving for you. It's fighting me. Every lap feels like a war." Charles nodded, thoughtful. "It fights me too," he replied. "The difference is, I know its tricks. I've learned its moods. It took me years to understand how to survive in this thing. You've had, 12 weeks. And people expect miracles just because your name is Lewis Hamilton." Lewis let out a dry laugh, no joy in it, only irony. "That name used to mean something," he said, voice rough. "Now it just sets the bar higher while I sink lower. I'm supposed to be the mentor, the motivator, the one who brings wisdom and confidence. But lately, I feel like I'm dragging dead weight." "You're not," Charles said quickly. "You're carrying expectations no one else could even stand under. And let's not pretend this car is perfect. It's brutal. It punishes instinct. It demands compromise. It breaks confidence before it builds trust." Lewis looked up, eyes hollow. "I thought coming here would reignite something," he said. "But I feel disconnected, from the machine, from the mission, from myself." Charles leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You haven't lost yourself," he said. "You're just shedding an old skin. You're not here to recreate what you were. You're here to evolve into something even more dangerous." Lewis stared at him, something flickering behind his exhaustion. "You believe that?" "I do," Charles nodded. "And I know this team hasn't earned your trust yet. But that doesn't mean they don't need your fire. We need your fire, Lewis. Even when it's quiet. Especially when it's quiet." The two sat there for a long moment, neither speaking. Outside, a wind rustled through the team flags still hanging from the awnings. The paddock was asleep, but here, in this dimly lit corner, something was waking up again. "You've grown," Lewis finally said, a faint trace of pride behind the weariness. Charles smiled faintly. "You taught me how." Lewis exhaled. Not a sigh of surrender, but one of release. The pressure didn't vanish, but for the first time that night, he wasn't carrying it alone. "Thanks, man," he said quietly. Charles stood, placing a hand on Lewis's shoulder before turning away. "We'll figure this out," he said. "Together." And as he disappeared into the dark hallway, Lewis remained where he was, head lower, heart heavier, but with the smallest ember of something returning to life. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of a refusal to give up. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Inside the dim glow of his private quarters, Lewis Hamilton sat like a statue carved from disappointment. The rain outside Suzuka's paddock was relentless, but not as relentless as the betrayal tightening around him. Each droplet felt like a drumbeat of inevitability. His race boots were still half-laced, his fireproofs damp with effort, but this wasn't sweat from physical exertion. This was emotional combustion, months in the making. There was a knock, but only once. Charles Leclerc stepped in, his face a mixture of remorse and restraint. No words yet. None were needed. Hamilton's voice broke the silence first, low and jagged. "So, it's official then?" Charles nodded faintly, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, it's happening. Quietly, but it's moving fast." Hamilton leaned back against the headrest, letting the weight of that confirmation bury itself deeper into his spine. He didn't react with rage. He didn't flinch. He simply absorbed it, like a man who'd already died on the inside weeks ago. "They're pulling the plug," he murmured. "Legal's been working non-stop," Charles admitted. "They're coordinating statements. Talking with sponsors. Your PR team is already looped in, I think." Of course they were. Hamilton had seen the signs long before anyone said it aloud. The ignored calls. The stiff handshakes. The tech briefings that used to welcome his insight now treated him like background noise. The air in Maranello had shifted. It was no longer filled with belief. It was infected with bureaucracy, caution, and corporate detachment. This wasn't a divorce. This was an assassination, with a smile. What began as a bold alliance, Hamilton and Ferrari, two titans united by ambition, was collapsing into a cautionary tale. And the tragedy? It didn't fall apart because of pace or results. It was undone by pride, by insecurity, by an unwillingness to evolve. From the very first test session, Hamilton had pushed for change. He questioned every assumption. He challenged every shortcut. But Ferrari, for all its beauty and legacy, remained addicted to its own myth. It wanted Hamilton's victories, but not his voice. His presence disrupted the status quo, and in an organization allergic to introspection, that was fatal. Fred Vasseur, once a trusted architect of this vision, had grown distant. He stopped seeking Hamilton's input. Team strategy decisions were increasingly made behind closed doors. And even when Lewis delivered results above expectations, the acknowledgement came cold, rehearsed, political. Now, as the paddock buzzed with rumors and headlines about contracts, exits, and backroom warfare, Hamilton sat in the eye of the storm, silent, measured, watching the empire around him cave in. But this wasn't a man defeated. It was a lion preparing to roar. "You don't deserve this," Charles finally said, voice thick. "You gave everything." Lewis offered a weak smile. "It was never about deserving. It's about being allowed to lead." They wanted a symbol, not a leader. And that was the real wound. Not the early termination. Not the politics. But the realization that the dream he gave his soul to, this vision of turning Ferrari into a modern powerhouse, had never been shared. They saw him as a marketing asset, not a warrior. What Ferrari didn't understand was this: Lewis Hamilton doesn't play roles. He writes legacies. He wasn't here to wear red. He was here to rewrite what red could mean. But Ferrari wasn't ready. Not for evolution. Not for uncomfortable truths. Not for a driver who wouldn't bow to tradition for the sake of optics. And now, as journalists circled like vultures and rival teams quietly adjusted their 2026 lineups, Hamilton sat on the verge of another reinvention. Audi. Whispers were already echoing through the garages. A new project. A clean slate. A manufacturer willing to hand him the keys, not just to a car, but to a vision. Aston Martin. A long shot, or maybe not. There were rumors that Stroll Sr. was considering an exit and that a leadership vacuum could be forming. Mercedes. A fairy tale return wasn't off the table. Not if Toto saw the opportunity to make history once again. But wherever he landed, one truth was becoming painfully obvious to everyone watching this saga unfold. Lewis wasn't finished. He wasn't retiring. He wasn't fading. He was transforming. What Ferrari misjudged, what they failed to comprehend in all their boardroom analytics and PR polish, was that greatness doesn't just need horsepower. It needs freedom. It needs vision. It needs respect. And that's something no team can fake. One day, they'll look back. Maranello's walls will echo with memories of the one man who could have delivered the impossible, and they'll realize they didn't just let him go. They drove him out. Not with malice, but with cowardice disguised as tradition. And the headlines? They'll say, mutual agreement. They'll say, amicable split. But the truth will live in every unfinished race. Every ignored message. Every time Hamilton's telemetry pointed to potential and was buried under silence. Because Ferrari didn't just lose a title. They lost a revolution. And the next time Lewis Hamilton walks through the paddock, head high, eyes forward, dressed in something other than red, the world will understand something Maranello never did. You don't hire Lewis Hamilton to fit your legacy. You hire him to rewrite it. And if you're too afraid to let that happen, then you never deserved him in the first place.